Good morning. Though in Israel, in Gaza, in Lebanon, it is anything but a good morning. Thousands dead, more than 1 million driven from their homes, and no sign of an end to the fighting. Tomorrow marks a full year since the murderous attacks by Hamas in southern Israel. A year that spread the war from Gaza in the south to Lebanon in the north. And a year that brought the tensions to Britain's own streets. Science Secretary Peter Kyle will set out the UK response to the crisis. Plus, as we're coming up on Labour's first 100 days in power, aside from rows over freebies and repeated warnings about the state of the public finances, how has this new government made its mark? He'll tell me. The UK seized control of the Chagos Islands. Cue much wailing and gnashing of teeth from Tory leadership candidates. But how much of the decision is down to the previous government? Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell joins me. As Israel's onslaught against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon continues, we hear from the Lebanese ambassador to the UK, Ramy Mortada. Plus, as Israel's war cabinet weighs its response to the attack by Iran, Israeli ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, will be here. So, as the Middle East teeters on the brink, we're joined by 3 people in the know. With us throughout today's show, former editor of the Financial Times and author and broadcaster Lionel Barber, Whitehall editor of the FT and podcaster Lucy Fisher, and former diplomatic editor of Newsnight, now Sunday Times columnist Mark Urban. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. There are those who think that foreign disputes really shouldn't be our business. It was a British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, who in 1938 described tensions between Germany and Czechoslovakia as a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. 2 years later, we were at war. In today's globally interconnected world, we are a little less complacent. We've seen Russia's invasion of Ukraine drive up the cost of heating our homes. The conflagration spreading across the Middle East now threatens any hope we might have had of a quick return to economic stability. In a poll published this morning, fewer than 1 in 7 people believe that we can afford to sit this one out, though not everyone agrees whose side we should take. The Prime Minister warns that the passions roiling Israel, Gaza and Lebanon are spilling over into our own communities. He's right, because it's happening over there doesn't mean it won't divide us over here. So this morning, we'll be talking not just about the violence in the Middle East, we'll be asking how it's challenging us here at home. Let's start this morning with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Science Secretary, Peter Kyle. Peter Kyle, can we just start by establishing a couple of facts? Do we know how many British citizens are still in Lebanon who need to get out?
Well, we're providing 3 flights have already left. Another one will be leaving today. But there isn't demand for more at the moment, but we're on standby if more people do need them. So that's the key facts. The consulate services have been outstanding. The British government has been prepared. And as I say, we have more flights on standby should we need them.
Both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have called for a ceasefire. Neither the Israelis nor Hezbollah seem to have paid the slightest bit of attention. What's the plan B?
Well, the Prime Minister on behalf was the first G7 leader who came out calling for a ceasefire and restraint. But we have to work in synchrony with our international allies. The US President is also calling for a ceasefire now and is calling for restraint. We can only have some influence, as we've seen in the past, when an international community comes together and works together. Now, we know that at the moment that we can advise, we can't dictate to either side in this conflict, but what we are doing is speaking as one united set of allies in the G7, calling for restraint and a move towards a political settlement. We know there's been precedent in the past for this situation. We need to get back to that same framework whereby there is disarmament in Lebanon, but also there is withdrawal and restraint from Israel.
So far, nobody's paid much attention, even though we are allies. But our principal ally in the region, or here in this particular conflict, is, of course, Israel. And we presumably are talking to them. Are we advising the Israelis not to hit targets inside Iran?
So at the moment, yes, of course, the Prime Minister has spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu, but also we are coordinating quite tightly with our international allies as well. We are asking for restraint. What we can't
but
do...
nobody's actually paying any attention, are they?
Well, Israel is a sovereign state. Israel has the right to defend itself. This latest conflict was escalated by Iran sending bombs and missiles into Israel. So it has complicated an already complicated situation even more. That's why we have to use as much diplomacy as we can to call for restraint. But look, Israel is a sovereign state. We can advise as allies. What we can't do is dictate. And that is the situation that we're in, and we are advising restraint. We are using all the influence we do have, which is diplomatic. Now, of course, you know, Israel is acting stridently. We want to make sure that there is as much restraint as possible and a move to a political, diplomatic solution, because that is the only way this entire conflict is going to come to an end ultimately.
You use the word stridently. That's an interesting word. Mr. Netanyahu has been pretty unequivocal that he plans to do whatever is necessary, he thinks, to meet his war aims. What will the UK's position be if Mr. Netanyahu decides that he does want to strike inside Iran?
I'm not in the business of predicting the future and talking on hypotheticals at this moment. We are the British government.
Well, it's not that hypothetical. He's been pretty clear. He told Mr. Macron where to get off yesterday.
We are advising restraint. The Prime Minister has spoken to Mr. Netanyahu. What he would have said in that conversation is pretty obvious, because publicly we are calling for de-escalation. So it is clear what the British position is. It is clear what we are advising Israel, and it is clear what we're doing as an international community, because the Prime Minister has spoken to President Biden in recent days. He's spoken to President Macron in recent days. We're trying our best as an international community to urge restraint, urge a movement towards a political settlement, because this is the only way that this complex and deepening war is going to end.
The Israeli government and the Israeli people are not the same thing, and our position as a country, I think, is that we are supportive of the Israeli people. Does the Prime Minister accept that there may come a point at which the interests of the Israeli people are no longer being served by the Israeli government?
Our job right now is to work with the Israeli government to bring as much influence as we can, in lockstep with our international partners, to urge restraint and a movement to a political settlement.
Have we set out some red lines for Mr. Netanyahu?
What we have said is quite public, because, you know, I think, you know, you can call it a red line, you can call it urging. We are doing everything we can using normal political lines and diplomatic lines to bring this solution, to bring this conflict to an end using diplomatic means. Now, of course, when Iran starts sending missiles into Israel, of course, that is going to lead to a provocation that makes it more difficult to move towards a diplomatic and a negotiated settlement. But we have to get there, and we're using all of the diplomacy we can, because Britain alone can't do it. But we've seen in the past, since the appalling attacks of October 7th last year, we've seen since then that the only time there's been movement towards restraint has come when the international community stands together, and we're doing all we can to do so.
We talked about the geopolitics of this, but this conflict has come home, hasn't it? How worried is the government about the impact of all this at home? I see the Prime Minister's written in a newspaper this morning about vile hatred, I think he called it. And it's interesting. Have a look at these numbers. These are the numbers reported by the Community Security Trust for anti-Semitic incidents reported every month. And we obviously saw a spike a year ago. It's tailed off, but the level, month by month, is still higher than it was in previous times. How concerned is the government? We
are concerned. And as the Prime Minister has said repeatedly, that we need to work to end this conflict, because when conflict emerges in the Middle East, we see how it impacts communities around the world. You know, the divisions that are being expressed in the Middle East are divisions which sometimes emerge in other countries as well, and here in the UK. And we're really worried about that. Anti-Semitic attacks have risen, and it is appalling. You know, we have worked assiduously as a government to work with law enforcement to make sure, and beyond, to make sure that we tackle anti-Semitism at its roots. That is our guiding mission in this case. We've learnt a lot as a Labour Party about these issues, and we're trying as hard as we can to make sure that we tackle anti-Semitism and other kinds of bigotry and hatred at its absolute roots. And you saw just yesterday an absolutely strident statement from the Home Secretary, making sure that when there are hateful messages that come onto our streets, that the law enforcement agencies have the full support of this government and the Home Secretary and Prime Minister in order to do what they need to do to keep us safe.
So do you think somebody who carries a sign on a demonstration saying, "I love Hezbollah," should be prosecuted?
Somebody who carries that sign is committing a criminal act. And the law enforcement agencies have the full support of the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister and this government in doing what they need to do to make sure that criminal acts like that are tackled.
Rachel Reeves will bring us her budget at the end of October. I think you and she this morning would like us to be talking about the investment in green industries and so on. Obviously, there are other priorities right now, but let me just ask you about that. She keeps telling us that you're already £22 billion in the hole. You want to invest. Whose money are you going to spend?
Well, we have money to spend. I mean, government does have money to spend. It's how you actually invest. And this is the
So why are you bothered about 22 billion if you've got this money?
Well, because what you have to do is two simultaneous things. We have to fix the damage left that was inherited by the previous government, that awful £22 billion black hole. But we also need to get the economy growing. Now, if you look at my department, for example, you know, I've had to go through and reprioritise. So we are investing in the technology of the future, but by doing so wisely, you can attract private sector investment as well. And this is the incredible thing that we're trying to do at the moment, this balancing act. So just take a couple of weeks ago when Amazon said that they were going to invest £8 billion into the British economy, £8 billion. They did that because we have performed the regulatory changes. We have adapted planning reforms, the kind of things that are unlocking investment. So there are things government can do that bring investment in. And the most basic of all is ending the chaos and instability we had before, having a stable government that's doing the reforms needed to our economy that attract investment. So you can do these two things together, and it's not one thing or another.
Let's talk about stable government. You know, you want people to be talking about investment, but they aren't. What they're talking about is suits. And one of the reasons that you can't get past what people call freebie gate is that the government itself doesn't seem to be very clear. Prime Minister says he's not going to take any more wardrobe money, but he doesn't seem to be too bothered about free tickets to Arsenal or club nights in Ibiza. What is actually the guidance here? Are you guys not taking these offers, or are you? Well,
the first thing to say is that none of the rules were broken. We tried really...
No, I'm not asking about
let me just
broken.
Explain, because we tried so hard while we had a previous set of leaders of our country, a previous government that were just flouting the rules, breaking the rules and lowering the standards. It's important. We focused so much on the rules that what we didn't do, and we now know we have to do, is take what the public are thinking about what happens within the rules. This is something that we didn't quite see at the time. So what we're trying to do is adapt to what is the expectations, because expectations of this Labour government are so much higher than they were of the previous government for understandable reasons. And we're trying to meet the expectations that the public have. Now,
no, you're trying to meet the expectations you yourself set, because you couldn't stop criticising the other lot for every transgression.
No. The point, Trevor, we've criticised them for breaking the rules.
Asking you,
we've criticised them for breaking the rules. Priti Patel broke the ministerial code, had no consequence. Boris Johnson spent tens of thousands of pounds on wallpaper, never said where the money was coming from, and tried to hide it. You know, these things were not declared. You know, so what we're trying to do...
what you're doing is what you guys always do, take us back to the terrible Tories. I just asked you, what is the position for ministers about accepting free football tickets or club nights in Ibiza? Is it on or is it off?
Everything is declared. And we will.
So it's okay.
Everything is declared. We will stick to the rules. What Keir Starmer has done is he's repaid the articles that have happened since the election, and we're also working on a new set of rules because there's a separate set of rules at the moment for people who are government ministers from MPs. So we're updating the rules so that it reflects the expectations that we believe the public have post-election.
OK, unfortunately, we will no doubt be talking about this for many weeks to come. But just very quickly, one last question. Chagos Island. Is the government planning to give away any other British territories? Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, for example?
No and no. This was a negotiation that's been going on for some time. There's been 13 rounds of negotiations. 11 rounds of those negotiations happened under the Tories, a lot of them with James Cleverly leading from the Foreign Office. This is a good deal. The entire text has not been published yet, and I urge people to wait for that text because the text protects Britain's right to have a military base there. It has been endorsed by America, so of course the Chinese concerns that have been raised by some of the leadership elections irresponsibly simply aren't there in the thing, and we are taking care and making sure that those people who have been unfairly treated, who were residents on the island before, will have the justice that they deserve and the right to return. This is a win-win negotiated by this government. The previous government clearly couldn't get it across the line in the interests of the country and in the interests of the region.
Peter Kyle, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks.
Well, we'll get reaction to that interview from my panel in a moment. But first, Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell is here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with the Middle East. How close do you think we are to a point of no return that would draw the Iranians into conflict?
Well, the Iranians, of course, have already responded, and on both occasions when they attacked directly from Iran, Israel, British military forces were engaged in trying to help Israel as a very strong ally. And of course, we want to see de-escalation, we want to see negotiation, and we want to see people's eyes lifted towards the possibility of a political solution. We should never forget that following the darkest hour is dawn. Following the Intifada, we had the substantial progress that was made over the Oslo Accords. But Israel is a firm ally, and we strongly support Israel's right of self-defense against Iran.
As an ally, what would you be saying to Israel now? Do you think that the incursion into Lebanon, the airstrikes, the pager bombs and so on, are helping?
I think on Lebanon, Israel has an absolute right of self-defense. Imagine if this was Britain and there were rockets being fired every day. The rockets started firing on October the 8th last year across the Lebanese border. They've made that part of Israel uninhabitable. 60,000 people have had to move south. No government would tolerate this, and Israel is absolutely right to try and make sure that the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, which says that Hezbollah must withdraw behind the Litani River, that should be implemented. And the fact that their citizens are being shelled and killed by Hezbollah gives them an absolute right in self-defense to drive them back.
I understand moral case and all of that, but what I'm really asking is, what do we think is going to be the outcome of all of this? They're saying this morning that what's really happening now is that Israel's creating yet another generation of anti-Israeli fighters now in Lebanon, recruiting for Hezbollah, essentially.
Oh, Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation. It's prescribed by the British government. It's prescribed around the world. We've seen in recent days that they are a cancer inside Lebanon, which many local people resent deeply. Last week, we saw an Iranian plane that was going to land in Lebanon turned back by the Lebanese government. The British government has given a lot of training to the Lebanese army. Israel is absolutely within its rights to try and move Hezbollah back behind the Litani River. And it will be very different, I think, from 2006, because the weaponry, the intelligence,
when
the
Israel
resources,
previously invaded Lebanon.
Yes, where they got bogged down for a very long period of time. But the weaponry, the science, the ability to push these people back, I hope will be very different this time.
So no red lines for Israel right now?
Well, I think it's very important that we recognise Israel's right of self-defence. After all, the fundamental question you have to ask following October the 7th last year is, do you believe that Israel has the right to exist? And if you do believe that, they have the right of self-defence against these appalling pogroms and terrible attacks.
Peter Kyle just, when I spoke to him earlier, responded on the deal which has been announced over the Chagos Island, in which we return sovereignty, essentially, or we give sovereignty, I beg your pardon, to Mauritius. Some of your colleagues have denounced this as a tremendous sellout. Is he? Are they, as he's suggesting, being a bit previous?
Well, the government hasn't told us the terms of this deal. I was obviously involved within the Foreign Office in the earlier negotiation rounds. It wasn't my ministerial role, but I was aware of what was happening. This is definitely, from what we've seen, not the deal the last Conservative government would have done. We're extremely...
Because you did start these negotiations, didn't
Yes,
you?
but starting negotiations is not the same as concluding them. And from what I've seen, this is definitely not a deal either David Cameron or indeed James Cleverly would have done. And we need to see the terms that they're offering. We need to know about what protection there is against Chinese encroachment into the archipelago. We need to know what money is being provided by the British taxpayer. We need to probe the terms of the lease. After all, the lease in Hong Kong wasn't what we had hoped. And we need to do all those things, and the right place to do them is in the House of Commons. And His Majesty's opposition will put down tomorrow an urgent question in the House of Commons, if there isn't a statement from the government, so that we can probe the terms of this. But from what we have seen so far, and by the way, it should have been announced in the House of Commons, which is the right place to do these things, from what we've seen so far, this looks like a bad deal for Britain.
Let's talk about the Conservatives. I was in Birmingham last week for your conference. Government doesn't seem to be firing on all cylinders, but they were all very cheerful, despite the fact that you got a thrashing in July. What can the Conservative Party possibly have to smile about right now?
Well, I think the conference was facing the future and was looking at which of these four excellent candidates are going to be our leader after November the 2nd. So it was, in that sense, an optimistic conference looking forward and hearing what each of them has to offer their party and their country. But you're right in saying that the contrast between Starmer's start after July the 5th and, for example, Tony Blair's start in 1997, when the Conservative Party last received such a drubbing, and I lost my seat at that time. The contrast is enormous. I think that the Blair government at least had a strategy. This government doesn't appear to have any strategy at all.
I wasn't actually offering you an opportunity to have a go at Labour. I was really asking you about your party, because the thing that struck me most about the four candidates that you mentioned is that not one of them seemed to acknowledge any of the key reasons that you lost in July. Boris Johnson's lockdown parties, Liz Truss's budget, and Nigel Farage's Reform Party. Would you accept that whoever becomes leader, until you acknowledge those facts, nobody's going to be listening to you?
Well, I think there was an undercurrent addressing those issues. The issue about reform is not to cosy up to reform or anything like that. It is to develop the policies which will mean that people return from reform to supporting the Conservative Party. In opposition, I've done it before. You know, it's a terrible time always. But the one thing you can do in opposition is plan for the time when you hope to be re-elected and once again serve the British people. And so the right approach on reform is to get the right policies so that people don't feel they need to vote for a party other than the Conservatives.
Have you decided who you're backing yet?
Well, so far I've been voting to keep people in, but I will have to make a decision on which of the two once we get to that point later this week. Party
elder, grand elder statesman and so on. Give your colleagues some leadership this morning. Who do you want?
Well, I think that in James Cleverly we see tremendous good communication skills. I think that in Kemi we see real charisma. I think in Robert Jenrick we see real hard work and getting to grips with the policy issues. And I think we see great gravitas in Tom Tugendhat. So there's something in each of them. We've just got to decide which of those great characteristics
You just give me the Strictly Come Dancing answer. What I really wanted was who are you choosing?
Well, I haven't decided. Honestly, Trevor, I haven't decided yet. But on the Tuesday vote, I will certainly be voting to keep Tom Tugendhat in.
OK. Andrew Mitchell, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.
Thank you.
OK. Well, let's see our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the author and former editor of the Financial Times, Lionel Barber, the Whitehall editor of the Financial Times, Lucy Fisher, and the former diplomatic editor of Newsnight and Sunday Times columnist, Mark Urban. Lionel, we will come to the Conservative Party and all of that in due course, but let's go back to the conversation that I've had with both these gentlemen about the Middle East. Let me start by asking this. Does what we think matter?
The British.
Yes.
It matters. Whether it matters a lot is debatable because Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, is going his own way. I mean, he ignored President Biden's urging to show some restraint, and he's basically, Biden's not talked to Netanyahu since August 21st. So I think Britain, if this escalates, and I think Andrew Mitchell was suggesting this, we're probably going to be drawn in some way or another. And at the moment, the Middle East is definitely on code red, and there is a cycle of retaliation. The Israelis will respond to the ballistic missile attack from last week. Remember, it was actually an attack on Mossad headquarters. So the question is, what will they do? I would question whether they go fully for the nuclear facilities. That would be a big red line, but there's going to be serious escalation in the next few days.
Lucy, same question really. What part do we play in here?
Well, I think we have a particular role in being a formal channel to Iran. Of course, the US hasn't had formal diplomatic relations with Iran since 1980s. So we saw David Lammy, speak with his Iranian counterpart in New York at the United Nations General Assembly last week. That's a useful kind of conduit role. We play a wider role in the Quint with the US, France, Germany, and Italy. But beyond that, I think not only is Netanyahu shown himself fairly impervious to pressure from the real superpower, the US, as Lionel pointed out, but, Keir Starmer has really rather drastically overhauled UK foreign policy on Israel since coming to power 3 months ago. He's restored funding to UNRWA, the UN refugee agency in Palestinian territories. He's moved to drop objections to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, applying for arrest warrants against Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders. And then the real kind of hammer blow to Israel last month was that partial suspension of arms export licenses to Israel. So I was very struck last week in New York that, Keir Starmer wasn't able to meet with Netanyahu. Downing Street insisted, the diaries didn't align. But I wonder if there's a sort of further sort of weakening of UK influence over Israel there.
What do you think, Mark? Because I noticed that Netanyahu was pretty, I won't say vituperative, but pretty strong in his criticism of Mr. Macron yesterday. And they were pretty sniffy about, as Lucy said, the British government's decision on weapons components or export licenses for weapons components. Are we getting more or less influence with the Israelis?
Less, I think, at this particular moment. I mean, I think the British positioning on this is very tricky because, on the one hand, we're here for the 7th of October anniversary. I think it is fair to say there's a lot of despair in British government circles about the conduct of operations in Gaza and, the restoration of funding to UNRWA, the refugee agency, is all part of that, a sort of British attempt to show greater identification with the suffering of the people in Gaza. On the other hand, we have also seen this sort of de facto emergence of these rival alliance systems, the so-called axis of autocracies, Russia, Iran now helping Russia with ballistic missiles, China helping Russia with various components for weapons, and then North Korea. And then on the other side, we have to face the fact that Iran waded into this on the 8th of October last year. They got Hezbollah and the Houthis and their other proxies to start firing at Israel and has at every turn tried to turn up the pain for the Israelis. And of course, the UK positioning vis-a-vis Iran is clearly pretty adversarial. So are we part of this wider democratic front against the axis of autocracies, or are we trying to curb Israel's excesses in Gaza? I mean, that's the bind that the British government finds itself in.
We hear from all the government spokespeople, ceasefire now and so on. Does anybody think there's any prospect of that being taken seriously?
No, there will not, because, first of all, the Israelis have made it very clear that they will respond hard to the attack last week. Similarly, Israeli military operations are clearly ongoing and, in fact, escalating. It's not just over the border, where that area. I've seen it myself, looking over the border, bristling with rockets and the Hezbollah are deeply embedded. They want to clear that area. They're also attacking targets in northern Lebanon. And they still haven't finished with the Hezbollah high command. I mean, they're still taking out top operatives even after killing Nasrallah.
Yeah. It's this point that Lionel made, actually. If you haven't been there, it's hard to imagine how small the space here is and how close the combatants are. If you look down from, I don't know, Golan Heights, or you look across from Lebanon, they're all very, very close.
But I'd also add, we have to look at Netanyahu and his role here, the complex web of motivations underpinning what he's doing. He's facing criminal charges. Those remain in abeyance as long as he's prime minister. In the past month, since he's pivoted from Gaza to Lebanon, he's seen his ratings surge. He's really trying to press his political advantage here as much as anything else. So that's another reason I think, the prospect of a ceasefire looks, increasingly unlikely.
We're going to come back and carry on with this in a second, but I want to go to get the witness from out there in a moment. It's just after 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Science Secretary Peter Kyle told me that Israel is acting stridently in the Middle East. He called for restraint, saying the UK can only advise, not dictate, and urged Israel not to strike Iran. Lots more to come this morning, with all eyes on the Middle East this weekend. Shortly, we'll hear from Lebanon's ambassador to the UK, Ramy Mortada. And straight after that, we'll speak to Israel's ambassador, Tzipi, Hotovely, ahead of tomorrow's anniversary of the Hamas attacks. Let's go to that rapidly deteriorating situation in the Middle East now. Overnight, at least 24 people have been killed in Gaza in Israeli airstrikes on a mosque and a school. Israel says it has struck weapons storage facilities belonging to Hezbollah in southern Beirut. Now, Sky has teams across Israel and Lebanon to cover the conflict, including our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, who's live in Beirut for us this morning. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, Trevor.
What is the latest on the ground right now?
Well, we've woken up to another very, very heavy night of bombing. It went on into daylight, actually. I think it's probably the most severe airstrikes, multiple airstrikes. The Israelis say around about 30 on the capital, the southern suburbs of the capital. Huge plumes, orange, big mushroom clouds, and it went on all the night, and as I say, into daybreak. It's just to emphasize, these are utterly terrifying. They are thuddering noises, and they're causing huge amount of devastation. The area that they are targeting is Dahir, the southern suburbs. It is definitely known as a stronghold of Hezbollah. There are obviously have been key commanders who've been there, but it's also a population of 600,000 people, many of whom are not Hezbollah. So the amount of destruction it's causing is quite a lot. Humanitarian crisis is clearly unfolding. You can see behind me people sleeping on the streets. 1.2 million people have now fled from their homes, not just in the south, but also in parts of Beirut, in the east, in the north. Israel appears to be attacking fresh areas, like the north in Tripoli. They attacked that yesterday. They've attacked two separate Palestinian refugee camps, one near Saida, which is further south from where I am, one in the north in Tripoli for the first time. Israeli soldiers appear to be inside the country based on what they're putting out on social media and what the Israeli Defense Forces are saying. So the situation is absolutely dire, with the Lebanese economy minister saying that Beirut is a city under siege, and the UN saying that the health facilities are on the brink of collapse. There are something like 900 impromptu shelters, as well as hundreds, impossible to tell, probably thousands of people sleeping rough on roundabouts, on the beach, under trees, everywhere, Trevor. So it's pretty dire here at the moment.
It looks and sounds as though the Lebanese government itself has pretty much zero control of what's happening on its territory. What is the expectation there of what Israel will do next? Because we understand that the War Cabinet has met and is considering its response to the Iranian ballistic missile strike.
Well, you're absolutely right. The Lebanese government appeared to be unable or unwilling to intervene. The Lebanese foreign minister went to the UN and told them the situation was catastrophic and urged international intervention, but they themselves are not able to wield much influence at this point against Hezbollah. Now, they were, interestingly, and this I think is key and important, the Lebanese foreign minister said that they had got an agreement with Hezbollah about a day or two before the Israelis bombed and killed the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. He said that they had got an agreement from Hezbollah for a ceasefire, and they understood through intermediaries through America that Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu had also agreed to a ceasefire. That was followed within 24 hours by one of the biggest bombings in the southern suburbs, which took out the Hezbollah leader, and that has continued. So we're seeing, yes, the Lebanese army completely powerless as well. The United Nations peacekeepers, known as peacekeepers, on the blue line, on the demarked de facto borderline between Lebanon and Israel, confined to their bunkers, unable to patrol even. Also confirming to me and to others in Sky News that they were asked to move some of their positions, particularly the Irish base was asked to move out of their positions for their own safety. The warnings that the Israeli military is giving to large swathes of the population are causing a great amount of terror. They're not seen at all as helpful. And yes, it's very difficult to see where this goes if Israel continues on using military force and apparently not engaging in any diplomatic or political talks. The last war, 2006, which went on for 34 days, the death toll's already topped that by quite a long bit now, within half that time, was only brokered through talks, through diplomatic talks and political talks where Israel and the Lebanese government and Hezbollah agreed to withdraw beyond the Litani River. The Israeli forces appear to be intent, according to what their politicians are saying, the IDF and Benjamin Netanyahu, they're now telling people to evacuate beyond the Awali River, which is north of Litani River. So the fear here is that they are planning or setting the stage for moving into the south of Lebanon, for taking up positions, because as we've heard repeated over and over again just overnight from Benjamin Netanyahu, that they are determined to push Hezbollah away and make their northern border safe. And that seems to mean to push everyone north of the Litani and maybe even further north than that. So that is the worry, Trevor.
Thank you, Alex. Stay safe. Now, listening to that update from Alex, the Lebanese ambassador to the UK, Ramy Mortada. Good morning, Mr. Mortada.
Good morning.
Can we just pick up a point that Alex made there? It's rumoured that the late Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a 21-day ceasefire shortly before he was assassinated, and that was known to the Americans and others. As far as you know, is that true?
Yes, we expressed our agreement to this scheme that was laid out by the US, UK, and 15 other nations. Unfortunately, also what happened when Netanyahu reached New York, he just rebuffed all this peace plan, and he's still doing that. So that's a text that is still binding to us. The Prime Minister had just reiterated that we're still attached to this text, asking for a ceasefire, 21-day ceasefire, and meanwhile negotiate a diplomatic arrangement that would address all the concerns.
So you think that there could have been a ceasefire and that was derailed by the assassination of Mr. Nasrallah?
That's a statement of fact that is known to everyone, Trevor. We're dealing with the warmongering Israeli government, and I think when they tell you that their concerns is about rockets being fired, when they tell you that their concerns is about 60,000 civilians that were displaced from northern Israel, there is a diplomatic way to address these concerns. Well, they chose a different path. They chose a path of violence, of brutalizing a whole population. It's not even about Hezbollah. They scapegoat groups here and there, like they scapegoat Hamas in Gaza, but it's not about Hezbollah. Today it's about Lebanon, it's not about Hezbollah.
Well, let's talk about Lebanon. I'm going to talk to the Israeli ambassador, and I'm sure she will have her own views about exactly what they are and whether they're warmongering or not. But let's just talk about the Lebanese people this morning. What can you tell us about the position, fatalities, displacement and so on. Alex Crawford painted a pretty vivid picture for us.
Well, you know, Lebanon is under a full-scale aggression with unfettered violence and unrestrained brutality. Already the death toll reached more than 2,000, 1.2 displaced, sparing no civilian lives, no civilian quarters in Beirut city and its suburbs, and all over Lebanon, sparing no medical facilities and support teams. They even bombing support teams when they try to attend to the blast sites, and total violation of international humanitarian law, an embargo over Lebanon. So it's a full-scale war which is causing, which has already caused and increasingly causing a humanitarian crisis.
But you attribute essentially the current situation to Israeli action, but is the brutal truth here actually that the Lebanese government doesn't control its own territory and that actually Hezbollah is the most powerful presence in your country and that actually you are, to some extent, they're prisoners, that actually this is as much what they are doing as what the Israelis are doing, and you can't do anything about it?
This is the deceitful Israeli narrative that tries to justify their warmongering pattern of behavior. Hezbollah, of course, is an important party.
You've got 60,000 Hezbollah fighters pretty much on your territory. Do you want them there or not?
Well, we've said that we have the framework, which is a UN framework.
Yeah, but
Resolution 1701.
can you take them out of your country or not?
They're Lebanese. How can you take part of your Lebanese population out of your country? Yes, they are Lebanese.
All the Hezbollah fighters are Lebanese people.
That came in a context, Trevor.
Not Palestinians.
No, they are Lebanese. Hezbollah fighters are Lebanese, and we shouldn't drag to this reductive and simplistic Israeli narrative, which always blames others for their wrongdoing. Hezbollah fighters came in a context. It's not a justification. It's just you need to understand how the genesis of how this happened in order to be able to address them. Israel occupied Lebanon for 22 years. And then when we had this 1701 framework, they continued their occupation to enclaves at our borders. So there is a pillar principle in international relations. Security can only be based on mutual security. You cannot expect your neighbor to give you security when you don't give him security. That's why we said the only way to address that is to put all these grievances on the table within this UN framework and address all concerns. But it was never about their population in the south. This is only a false pretext that they're using to terrorize the population, to divert attention from the fact that Israel is a country that only knows how to kill and cannot deliver peace.
I'm very happy to let you say what you said about Israel, but I just want you to be absolutely clear. Are you saying that Hezbollah is essentially a Lebanese operation sanctioned and tolerated by the Lebanese government and in some senses favoured by the Lebanese people? Is that what you're really saying?
There are many Lebanese that do not agree with Hezbollah. But this should be addressed in an inclusive Lebanese way and should be addressed in a way...
So is it okay for them to be firing thousands of their 150,000 missiles into Israel, displacing 60,000 Israelis? Is that something that the Lebanese authorities think is okay, or do they not want it to happen on Lebanese territory?
They want to address it in a way that is holistic, without singling out one side and moving away from what Israel has been doing.
But that's fine. You've been telling me all the things that Israel ought to do. You haven't said to me anything that Hezbollah ought to do.
But these things should be addressed holistically.
So what should Hezbollah do?
You cannot keep on singling out what Hezbollah has been doing and totally move away or look away from what Israel has been doing.
With respect, you spent 5 minutes telling me what Israel should do. You haven't yet told me what you want Hezbollah to do and how you'll make them do it.
Well, we have the 1701 resolution that is clear. It puts obligation on both the Lebanese side, but it also puts obligations on the Israeli side. Once they started delivering their obligations, respecting Lebanese sovereignty, refraining from violations to our airspace, then they would be putting the conducive elements to reciprocal obligations from all sides. That's what we're saying. You cannot have a reductive or simplistic, and that's what the Israelis always do. And they do it intentionally because their scheme is much beyond Hezbollah. It's not about Hezbollah the same way that in Gaza it's not about Hamas. It's a country that only knows how to kill and that is unable to deliver peace. They want to terrorize, they want to brutalize the populations around them as a way to divert attention that they are unable to deliver the two-state solution for the Palestinians.
All right. Okay, well, let me ask you this in another way then. Given that Hezbollah has bases in your towns and missiles on your land being used to kill Israelis, do you accept, as most states in the world appear to, that Israel has a right to go to war to defend its people?
Well, when you are in a posture of occupation, how can you speak about self-defense? You're occupying part of the Lebanese territories.
Do you accept that Israel has the right to defend its territory?
When it's in an occupying posture, even international law, when you are an occupier, when you have an occupation posture, does not grant you the right for self-defense. We have to deal with the crises at their inception. We have to look how they started. They always talk about October the 7th. All the Arab countries, they do not condone the horrors of October the 7th. But look at September of 2023. September came before October, I assume. 200 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank. So October the 7th came in a context, and that is not meant to justify. We all were shocked by the horrors of October the 7th, but they came in a context. It doesn't help to bash the United Nations. It doesn't help to bash the French president. Now the roadmap towards security and stability is clear. We get a ceasefire in Lebanon, we get a ceasefire in Gaza, and we look for a diplomatic way to address all concerns. And all concerns should be put on the table.
Ambassador, this case has been made many times, and all of the signs are it's not going to happen. Is this, in the end, a situation...
Because Israel is blocking it. It's clear.
Well, you may say it's Israel, other people will say it's Hezbollah and so on.
But listen to the
I just want to ask you about Lebanon itself. In the end, how does Lebanon see its way out of this crisis? Is it just going to be another occasion when the Lebanese people have to wait until it's all over, other people fighting on their land, and then they have to pick up the pieces?
No, I think we're stakeholders for peace in the region. We have subscribed to the Arab Peace Initiative, which speaks about peace in the whole region. However, you need conducive situation. You need cooperation from the other side in order to get to peace. Lebanon does not seek war. Lebanon has always been the victim of wars of the region, and now the victim of Israeli extremist government.
And Iran?
It's part of the region, and we need to find a way to accommodate all the stakeholders. It's not that Iran will disappear overnight. It has always been in the region. It's an important actor in the region. It has its plus and minuses, like all others.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you.
In just a moment, we'll hear what our panel makes of events unfolding in the Middle East.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling? I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media.
Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brought.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down. As them say, God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited. I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her. The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Before the break, we heard from the Lebanese ambassador, Ramy Mortada. Let's get reaction to that from our panel, Lionel Barber, Lucy Fisher and Mark Urban. The ambassador said something that surprised me. In fact, he said it twice, that Hezbollah was essentially a Lebanese operation. In what sense is that true, if at all, do you think, Mark?
Well, you know, if you think back to the year 2000, when the Israelis withdrew from southern Lebanon, and as it happened, I was there reporting. I got an interview with Hassan Nasrallah. You know, I met him, I discussed it. At that time, they were riding high, and they were benefiting from a broad Lebanese consensus that they had got the Israelis out with their campaign of guerrilla resistance. But a lot has changed since then. So that's how Hezbollah like to see themselves, is acting as a wider resistance movement for the whole of Lebanese society. And of course, the tensions have been much more aggravated in recent years. A lot of Lebanese blame Hezbollah for the port explosion in Beirut. They believe Hezbollah was storing explosive materials there.
And that pretty much crashed the Lebanese economy
ruined.
Well, actually, until now.
Yeah, ruined the city. There are also a lot of them, you know, believe that Hezbollah was involved in a very dangerous game in provoking the Israelis after October the 7th last year, and we're growing more and more anxious about it. You know, if one asks for the reasons for why does Israel have such good intelligence penetration in that society and of Hezbollah, I think it must be connected with the fact that there are other parts of society there that are very keen to act against Hezbollah, to give information. You know, that's part of their intelligence infrastructure in Lebanon, the Israelis. So that speaks to the degree to which other elements of Lebanese society now resent Hezbollah.
I look at Hezbollah as the cat's paw, maybe the tiger's paw of Iran, because they've built up such formidable rocket missile capacity. The calculation in Tehran was that if Israel were to think of escalating in a conflict with us, they would face overwhelming rocket attack from the north by Hezbollah. And remember, too, that Hezbollah's activities are not just confined to Lebanon. They were actively involved in the Syria war. And indeed, it was reported in the FT, a good piece last week. How did the Israelis penetrate Hezbollah, this terror organization? The answer is that Hezbollah got overextended in Syria, took in new operatives, as Mark was suggesting, and allowed themselves to become vulnerable.
We have sort of skirted around this morning the role of Iran, Lucy. Mm-hmm. What do you think the Iranians are going to do? How tough are they going to be?
Well, look, I think, Tuesday when we saw 200-odd missiles penetrate some of them, the Iron Dome was a very big moment. That missile that landed very close to the Mossad Israeli spy headquarters in Tel Aviv, another one near an F-35 base in the Negev desert, that does show intent. And I think it's very worrying to see Biden this week confirm there have been discussions about Israel, talking about striking oil facilities in Iran. Most analysts expect that Iran would then retaliate back against oil infrastructure in the Emirates or Saudi Arabia. So we could very quickly see ourselves in an energy war leading to kind of spiralling inflation. And of course, that is kryptonite to economies like the UK's and would have potentially a huge impact on the US election, depressing consumer sentiment just as voters head to the polls. So it's very, very worrying to sort of look, further down across the horizon about what could happen next. But we know Israel has promised Iran will pay a very heavy price, as they say, for that missile attack on Tuesday. And they are planning that retaliation right now.
Mark, you spent pretty much a lifetime studying the signs and the signals from this region. What should we look for in the next week that tells us either this is going to be we've reached peak conflict, or that things are going to spiral up? What will be the signs that tell us that we're in trouble or not?
I think a lot of it will be around the targeting. Some of these suggestions that they hit the Kharg Island oil terminal. I mean, that would have literally an utterly combustible effect, because the Iranians have said, well, if you do that, we'll take out your power stations. I think Iran has the capability to do that, and then very quickly you're into the most scary type of escalation. So does Israel decide, no, well, what we'll do is we'll hit elements of the Revolutionary Guard, the commanders, maybe some of the missile bases to show it's a military strike as a way of bringing things down a bit? Or the other option is, do they go for substantial and difficult targets, including possibly even the nuclear facilities, but with the US? I mean, that's a key quantum that we don't really know. We know the head of US Central Command is in Israel, apparently helping to coordinate the response to the Iranian ballistic missile attack of Tuesday. But does that mean that American planes might be taking part in this or not? Because, as Lucy says, in an election year, does America really want to enter into a bombing campaign against Iran at this point? We just don't know. I mean, these are the key variables.
Trevor, all this before we go on to Chagos Island.
All this is true, but really, let's get into Bibi's mindset. Does he believe, as some of his advisors do, that this is the moment to reshape the Middle East? They've got Hezbollah on the defensive. They've decapitated the high command. This is the moment to really change the game. Think of the number of characters that have just been taken off the board, not just Nasrallah. Remember the Iranian president, the hardline president, died in a helicopter crash. The temptation will be... think about 2002-03, like the Americans thought, we can reshape the Middle East. And that's why they may escalate. They may go for the nuclear.
Just the last couple of minutes in this part, can we just talk about something which we apparently do have some control over, which is the remnants of empire? Chagos Island. Now, Peter Kyle says, wait, we'll see the whole deal, and reassures me that we're not going to we're not going to sell off Gibraltar to Spain or the Falkland Islands to Argentina. What's happened here? What do you make of it?
Well, look, I think we do have to bear in mind that these were negotiations started in 2022 under Liz Truss. And frankly, public international opinion has been moving against the UK on this matter for some time and has really heated up in the past 5 years. In 2019, the UN passed backed a motion overwhelmingly, 116 votes to 6, saying the UK should return the islands. Even our allies like France and Germany decided to abstain on that motion. The same year, the International Court of Justice said the UK needed to return the islands as quickly as possible. So if you're thinking about this purely from the perspective of UK interests, trying to keep security, keep possession of the military base on Diego Garcia, which of course has been instrumental for US long-range bombers, flying off campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, widely thought to be a listening post, then coming to some sort of accommodation with Mauritius about this that will lead to the security of that base probably does make sense in some way.
Mark, very briefly, do you think they'll be smiling in Beijing about this?
Well, look at the Hong Kong precedent. When you liquidate sovereignty and hand it over, you really do lose control.
OK. Watch this space. Next, we will return to talking about the Middle East on the eve of the anniversary of the October 7th attacks on Israel by Hamas. The Israeli ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, will be here.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, Analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary of the Hamas attacks on Israel that triggered the start of the conflict in the Middle East. 1 year on, more than 40,000 people have been killed in Gaza. Those are figures from Gaza's health ministry. More than 1,000 Israelis and over 2,000 people in Lebanon have also been killed. Despite Western powers repeatedly calling for a ceasefire, conflict in the region has escalated, with Israel ramping up attacks against Hezbollah targets north of the border. Now, as Israel prepares a response to the Iranian missile barrage that targeted it earlier this week, President Benjamin Netanyahu says no other country in the world would accept such an attack on its citizens, and neither will Israel. The prospect of all-out war in the region feels closer today than it has for decades. Israeli ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, joins me now. Good morning, Ambassador.
Good morning, Trevor.
It's pretty much exactly a year since we spoke, the morning after the Hamas attack. Let me just start by asking you just a practical thing. What do we know about the 101 hostages who are still in Gaza?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting me this morning. 101 hostages, including one British citizen, Emily de Murray, young woman, 28 years old, full of life. I met her mother last week. She was speaking about her beautiful daughter that loved coming to London, loved watching football in this country. We're talking about two young children, the Bibas children, that are still in Gaza. We know that half of the hostages are still alive, and we want them back home. And Israel said yes 3 times to Biden's proposal to a hostage deal, and we expect the international community to put all its pressure on Hamas, on the leadership, on the people that influence Hamas, because it's time for them to be home.
You say you know that half of them are alive, and obviously I'm not going to ask you how you know that.
From testimonies of people that were released. As you know, Israel made few military operations to release some of the hostages, so the latest we know is from testimonies and intelligence, including great cooperation with the British intelligence.
So how do you respond to the accusation that's made by some of the families of these hostages that the Israeli government has put its war aims, wider war aims, before the lives of the remaining hostages?
There is no doubt that the thing that the Israeli government wants more than anything is to bring back our people. I know that from personally speaking to the Prime Minister. I know how much he's keen and how much he's working relentlessly to bring them back home. I'm afraid what the families should, I think it's quite clear for them, but still I want to say that we're dealing with a barbaric terror organization. We're not dealing with civilized people. We're not dealing with people that share the same values as we do. We're speaking about the same people that killed, raped, and butchered innocent people in their beds, beheaded people, and killed children in front of their parents and executed them. So this is the type of mentality we're dealing with.
But we're also talking about people, as we have heard from the Americans, as I've heard this morning from the Lebanese ambassador, whose leader, whatever you think about him, Hassan Nasrallah, agreed to a ceasefire before you killed him. And in that ceasefire, there must have been the possibility of extracting those hostages. So let me come back to the point. And it's perfectly reasonable for the Israeli government to say this is a matter of priorities. Are you putting the war aims of Israel ahead of the lives of the hostages?
Israel has 0 war aims. We just want our people to be safe and secure in their homes. And something that we couldn't make at the 7th of October, as you know, people felt they lost their security. And this is the first obligation of every government, to make sure the people will feel safe in their bedrooms. I mean, this is so basic.
Well, why not accept the ceasefire?
And going back to the...
Why not accept the 21-day ceasefire proposal?
Give me the opportunity, first of all, to address the fact you said something that has no base in reality, which is Hassan Nasrallah didn't agree to any ceasefire. It's just ridiculous. We're talking about an archived terrorist who's in charge of killing really hundreds of Israelis, Americans, and also hurt the Lebanese people that have been hijacked by Hezbollah. So let's not speak about the good intentions of a terror organization. They have zero good intentions. Since the 8th of October, they've been firing over 10,000 rockets on innocent Israelis. Houses were destroyed and 12 children were killed and butchered in a football game. This is something that we cannot accept. No country would have accepted that. And you know something? Just last Tuesday, we saw 180 ballistic missiles coming from Iran attacking direct civilian population in the center of Israel, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv. Can you imagine your government not responding to even one missile being fired on London? I doubt that. I really doubt that.
Yeah, you know that I'm not asking the question because I think that there are good intentions on somebody's part. I'm just dealing with what we understand to have been an offer. But let's talk about the way that Israel has, in a sense, prosecuted this. In what way does the series of strikes in Lebanon and the possible or the threat of invasion of Lebanon avoid a repetition of what happened last year and make Israelis safer?
Very, very simple to explain that. Hezbollah had a plan. We just exposed that. The IDF spokesperson just showed the underground tunnel that was supposed to go into Israeli villages and to commit exactly the same invasion and brutalic attack on innocent civilians. So the 7th of October was a plan that Hezbollah had to commit on our Galilee, on our northern border. And thanks to our powers, thanks to the fact we are operating on the ground, and unfortunately, we had to do something that we never did in the past, to evacuate 60,000 people and to make sure the northern border will be empty of civilians as much as you can, in order to prevent another 7th of October on our northern border. So Hezbollah was planning this type of invasion, and at the same time, it was holding an arsenal of missiles and rockets that could target every house and every facility in Israel. And this is something we eliminated in the last operation that Israel did. 60% of the arsenal is already eliminated.
Yeah, but you've also eliminated people. 28 health workers died in Israeli raids one day this week. Children have died. The pager and walkie-talkie attacks, of course, they were targeted at Hezbollah fighters, but you didn't know who was going to be in the room, and some people who were clearly not fighters died. The point here is the collateral, nobody is arguing about Israel's right to defend itself, but the collateral damage that Israel is building up is, some people would argue, building up actually even more hostility, creating more enemies, preparing a new generation of fighters against Israel. Is this really the way?
So we have zero interest in killing civilians. Zero interest, neither in Gaza or in Lebanon. We have nothing.
But you're doing it.
No, we're not doing it. What we're actually
doing, they're dying.
No, we're actually, it's Hamas and Hezbollah who are in charge, and let me explain why. Because they're using their own people as human shields, and you know that. You know that. They're a terror organization that couldn't care less about their human life in Gaza. This is Sinwar, with his cynical plan, created infrastructure in Gaza that turned every hospital, every nursery and kindergarten into a place that is a storage for rockets.
And my point is
can you imagine this type of cool and cynical plan of anyone doing that besides a terror organization?
And my point is, you know that, that's your point, that's your viewpoint, but you are still, as a country, and not you personally, but obviously Israel, is still pursuing an aggressive military strategy which does create this level of collateral damage. Now, how much are you prepared to contemplate in pursuit of your war aims?
I don't agree with the accusation. I think that
well, it's just a fact. People die because of Israeli missiles.
People die because your attacks in Afghanistan and Iraq.
It's not just Hezbollah
One
fighters.
second. People died because your attack in Afghanistan and in Iraq. There is no Western military, no matter how much cautious it wants to be, that can operate better than the way IDF is operating in a very populated area. What we do, and it's important to say, we warned the population, we made designated areas in Gaza, we called the population in Lebanon to flee, and they're actually listening to our calling, and they are fleeing to a better place to be safe, and we are minimizing casualties. So you need to understand, the main problem is the fact those terror organizations are using them as human shields, and by doing that, committing a double war crime.
Can I briefly ask you about two things? First of all, Iran. Are there any circumstances in which Israel would attack Iran itself rather than its proxies?
First of all options on the table now. The Prime Minister said it very clearly that he won't allow this type of threat to continue. Iran has a very strategic plan about how it wants to destroy Israel. It created this ring of fire around us through its proxies, and at 14th of April and last Tuesday, they were attacking Israel direct. As I said, 300 UAVs and ballistic missiles. We're speaking about the 180 missiles. This type of things, Iran did a mistake, and Iran will pay for this mistake. We're saying that loud and clear. And we're saying to our allies, if you want to prevent from Iran to be that aggressive, you need to join us fighting them by proscribing the IRGC because it's acting and behaving like a terror organization, and at the same time to impose more sanctions on the Iranian regime. They need to pay.
Very, very briefly, how worried are you about the impact of all of this on the Jewish community here in the UK, which is...
The Jewish community is being under a threat for the last few years. And I mean, I'm part of this community. I know because I go to the synagogue and I share with my friends their concern. They're feeling sometimes not safe to go in the center of London. I've seen those signs yesterday of I love Hezbollah in the center of London. Is that acceptable in any way to say you love and appreciate terror organization, doesn't share your British values? This is something that's beyond my understanding, how people can stand in the center of London, not to share affection to the Lebanese people, which I can understand, but actually share affection to a terror organization. This is beyond my understanding.
Ambassador, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Trevor.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel on Britain's place in what is right now a very dangerous world.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace. The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19, religion's nothing.
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I say,
Bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first. Significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Right, I'm back with Lionel Barber, Lucy Fisher and Mark Urban. Lucy, Iran will pay.
Strong words. Yeah. I mean, very much echoing what we've heard out of Tel Aviv so far, and it does feel like the next week is going to be instrumental in, finding out what exactly that means.
Before the break, you were talking about the signals, Mark. What did you read out of that?
Well, I think, as Lucy says, it's probably not going to be that much longer. I mean, one of the things I was looking at last night was where was Biden? Because I think when he goes to the Situation Room, whether or not the US is directly involved in this, we'll probably get a sense that something is imminent. I think also, I mean, it's interesting, the last 24 hours, very heavy level of Israeli operations, including air operations in Lebanon and Gaza. Well, OK, so they're busy with that right now. So we might see a slackening of air operations in those two places before whatever is going to happen with Iran actually starts to happen.
The Israeli ambassador is notoriously direct, but I thought, to be honest, she was even more direct than normal this morning.
Well, Trevor, they don't do grey, and they certainly haven't done grey since October the 7th. What is important, we know there are certain clues. President Biden said in the last 48 hours that they were in discussion, the Americans were in discussion with the Israelis about possibly targeting the oil facilities in Iran. But he then said, and this shows you the tensions within the administration, he didn't think that was a particularly good idea, mindful that oil prices are already above $70 a barrel, and clearly an attack in this area against Iran. Iran likely to retaliate, or certain to retaliate, maybe against the Saudi. They've done that before, by the way. They've shown the vulnerability of the Saudi oil fields. So I think we're in a very dangerous position. And this will resonate back in this country, because if we see shipping again disrupted in the Gulf, oil prices rising, this will have an impact.
This may be an obvious thing to say, and maybe even a little naive, but it's really striking. I've talked to two people representing their countries this morning, and both of them have essentially spent 10, 12 minutes saying exactly the same thing. Not us, it's them. How is it possible to get out of this?
Well, I think it's what we've known for a long time. These issues in the Middle East are incredibly entrenched. To my mind, I'm kind of interested in the fact that they aren't staying in the Middle East. Keir Starmer's intervention today in the Sunday Times, talking about the way that the sort of unrest is spilling onto UK streets. Yesterday, we saw thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters out, counter-protesters meeting some of those demonstrations, 17-odd arrests, I think, as well as the economic effect of potentially tension spiralling into all-out war in the Middle East. There is this sense that the politics is also increasingly permeating British society.
Indeed. I mean, these things used to be something that happened a long way away. Even when I started in journalism, Northern Ireland felt like a thing that never penetrated the mainland, but now actually it's on our streets. And I want to show you something. I showed the graph earlier on about the levels of anti-Semitic attacks reported every month. The long-run trend is it's coming down, but it's still way higher than it used to be. And there's another thing, a poll out this morning about the way that the whole country sees the Middle East conflict. And what is really interesting here is that a year ago, I think you'd have got basically everybody stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel, and the sentiment was very clear. Now, it feels as though the country is moving away from that sort of reflex support for Israel.
It's worrying if you are in Israel, but I don't think they're paying much attention to public opinion in the West. They see this, and this came across implicitly in the interview just done, Trevor, with the ambassador in London. Israel sees an existential threat. This was not just the Hamas attack, which killed 1,000 Israelis, civilians and military people on October the 7th, but also the rockets, the missiles targeted Israel, and of course the fact that it's come under attack by Iran. And now we are, to echo Lucy's point, we're in a wider war already.
Mark, a lot of this is felt most strongly within Britain's Jewish community. What sense do you get? Do you recognise the ambassador's response that this is really, it's not existential, but it's profoundly traumatic for the Jewish community here?
Well, I think clearly October the 7th attack was, but and of course, as we've seen from the graph you showed, the upsurge in anti-Semitic incidents and all the rest of it. So clearly, I think it's a very raw emotional state. That said, though, I think that as those doubts have grown among the wider population, they have also grown within the community about whether this is the right way to go. At what point is there an off-ramp? Coming back to your earlier question about how can we possibly get out of this, I think we saw in the diplomatic approach of a week or so ago of saying, well, look, if we can coordinate a Lebanon and Gaza ceasefire and tackle the hostage and Hezbollah questions at the same time, that could be an answer. But if things spin out of control with Iran, that's gone for the time being.
Well, thank you all very much. I don't suppose we're not going to be talking about this for many weeks. Back next week.